Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere warm hot. Actually, the kind of dry, dusty heat that makes your clothes feel like parchment and your tongue like a sun-baked stone. You're standing in a Persian desert, just outside an ancient city, and the sun has only just dipped below the horizon. But the air still radiates heat from the earth like an oven left cracked open. You can see stars blinking above the sand, sharp and silver like 1,000 tiny lanterns. The only sounds are the whisper of wind, and the soft shuffling of someone, maybe you, moving slowly toward something improbable. Because tonight's story is about something almost unbelievable. How, thousands of years ago, people in ancient Persia managed to make ice in the desert. Not by magic, not by sheer stubbornness, but by using air, mud, wind, and a deep understanding of how heat behaves. And sure, you probably won't survive this barefoot, let's make ice by moonlight journey. But that's fine, you're not here to survive. You're here to drift, and slowly, as the heat loosens, grip and the stars stretch out above you, we'll walk through the quiet genius of ancient Persian engineering. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, the ground under your feet is still warm, like a stovetop hours after dinner's been made. You step slowly through a narrow passage lined with low stone walls, crumbling in places, but still managing to guide you forward. The sand swirls at your ankles, a distant shape rises ahead, round, massive, and silent. The town behind you sleeps under clay rooftops and palm frond canopies. There are no street lamps. Only the occasional flicker of oil light through a window, and the sound of a goat shifting on its rope somewhere in the dark. And then, there it is. The Yakhchal, a massive dome rising from the earth like a beehive drawn by someone who was very good at geometry, but a little sleepy. It's made of mud brick, pale in the moonlight, its surface dotted with tiny holes for ventilation. The base is wider than a house and the walls curve up into a graceful point. It looks almost alive, like a creature breathing gently in the night. You pause, and the air shifts. A faint coolness brushes your face. It's subtle, almost imagined, but it's real. Inside that structure, buried beneath layers of clay and ash and darkness, there is ice, not much, but enough. And yes, the word Yakhchal literally means ice pit. It's where Persians stored the ice they made in the colder months, or, more magically, harvested in small batches on carefully managed desert nights. You'd think it's impossible, but then again, you're here, and there's a dome in front of you that shouldn't be able to do what it does. But somehow, it works. The first known yakhchals date back to at least 400 BC, some historians think even earlier. They were part of a network of passive cooling systems in ancient Persia, including qanats, those underground water channels we'll get to later, and windcatchers, vertical towers that grabbed at breezes like lazy weather vanes. The engineering was quietly brilliant. The domed shape wasn't just for show, it helped reduce thermal transfer, minimizing the surface area that faced the brutal sun during the day. And inside, a deep pit lined with special mortar, designed to resist heat and hold cold like a secret. Thick walls, sometimes 2 meters deep. Mud mixed with sand, lime, ash, and sometimes bits of straw or animal hair for reinforcement. Modern engineers still marvel at how well they worked. There's something comforting about it, really. This idea that humans, with no electricity and no plastic, just figured it out, watched the wind, felt the ground, learned the rhythm of the night, and played along. And here's the part most people miss. The Yakhchal wasn't just about storage. It was a social space, a quiet, respected structure. Maybe even a little mystical. Children were told to stay away from the base, partly to protect the ice, partly because no one wanted to rescue a goat-footed toddler from a 10-foot pit. There's still debate about just how much ice these things could hold. Some archaeologists estimate a Yakhchal could store several tons through the summer months. Others argue it was less about volume and more about preservation, keeping precious small amounts from melting before the next cold season. Historians still argue whether these were primarily industrial-scale solutions or family-scale luxuries. You circle the base now, your fingers brushing the walls. The brick is rough and cool. A few tufts of dry grass cling to the cracks. That's wheel overhead tiny ones, silent and fast. You find the narrow entrance low, almost crouch level and peer inside. It's dark, the kind of dark that swallows up your thoughts. But even here, even before you step through, the air feels different. The Yakhchal doesn't hum like a fridge. It doesn't buzz or blink, it just is. Still, patient, a kind of ancient patience you rarely find in modern things. It held what mattered, it endured, and tonight, it's ready to welcome you. You duck your head and step inside. It's cooler instantly, not cold, not yet, but cooler in a way that surprises your skin. Like stepping into a shaded cave after a long, hot climb, your eyes adjust slowly. The curved walls slow inward as they rise, forming a perfect dome that somehow feels both heavy and hollow. It smells of earth, dust, and something faintly mineral like old stone that's seen centuries of temperature swings. In front of you, there's a drop, a pit, rough-hewn, lined with stone and clay, descending several meters into the earth. This is the Yakhchal's heart, the ice chamber. During winter, or on select nights, when the temperature dips just low enough, this pit would be filled with blocks of ice gathered from shallow pools nearby or, in some cases, manually formed by the careful work of local laborers and nature's timing. You can almost picture it, men with cloths wrapped over their heads, using flat pans and bowls to scoop frozen crusts off the surface of water. Troughs under the stars, they'd carry these fragile, frost-edged slivers and stack them layer by layer in the pit, packing the gaps with straw or sawdust. The goal was to keep it all as airtight and insulated as possible. Even a few degrees made the difference between preservation and slush. Some nights, the ice wouldn't form at all. The desert doesn't obey schedules. But when it did, it felt like a small miracle. Step by step, you descend the shallow slope into the pit's basin. It's not quite claustrophobic. There's a kind of peace here, like the space remembers what it's for. It's quiet, not just silent, but acoustically still. Even your breath seems muffled by the thick earthen walls. Now imagine this. It's midsummer. Temperatures above ground are approaching 40 degrees Celsius, maybe more. The air is a thick, dry soup. Everything feels slower. The town here, in the Yakhchal, the ice carefully buried, thoughtfully guarded, hasn't melted. Not entirely. It's moist, cold, useful. Historians still argue about exactly how efficient these structures were. Some say they could keep ice preserved for months. Others believe that while the idea was sound, the yield was minimal, a luxury more symbolic than practical. A few fringe scholars even propose that some yakhchals were used for fermentation or even as ritual spaces when not filled with ice. No one's entirely sure. What we do know is that these domes were everywhere, sprinkled across the Persian plateau, especially near trade routes and settlements. You lean back against the wall and imagine standing here over 2,000 years ago. You wouldn't be wearing jeans, for one. More likely, you have a light robe or tunic, loose, breathable, maybe even soaked in water to keep cool. You'd probably be barefoot. You might even be carrying a ceramic jug, sweating slightly in your arms, filled with something precious, rose water, perhaps, or a syrupy fruit drink meant for a noble's table. Ice didn't just preserve it, elevated. A chilled beverage, in this world, was the height of sophistication. And let's not ignore the design of the dome itself. That shape wasn't just pretty, it served purpose. The conical structure allowed rising hot air to stay above the ice, while the thick insulating walls prevented conduction from the surrounding sun-blasted earth. There were usually ventilation shafts, sometimes cleverly angled to encourage air circulation. Windcatchers, tall and slender, might be positioned nearby too. Direct breezes down into the dome. Some yakhchals were connected to underground canets, the ingenious aqueduct systems that ferried water from mountain sources far away. These canets could cool the surrounding soil and help maintain humidity at just the right levels. And here's a quirky tidbit for you: many yakhchals were deliberately built outside city walls, not just to avoid the clutter of urban sprawl, but because they needed exposure to night skies. Clear, open air, the colder the radiation. At night, the more likely shallow water troughs would freeze. This wasn't guesswork. This was physics observed and obeyed by people who didn't have calculators, but had an extraordinary patience for watching the world work. You run your hand across the curved wall. It's rough but comforting. Somewhere above, an owl hoots, soft and low. You wonder who last stood here. Maybe a young worker, yawning while on shift. Maybe an elder, showing a grandchild the place where cold comes from. The stories don't survive, but the mud brick does. Suddenly, a memory surfaces. Not yours, but perhaps one embedded in the place. A bustling morning long ago, when a merchant's servant hurried down this same slope, lifted a lid made of woven reeds, and drew out a single block of ice, wrapped in straw. He had to deliver it fast across town, through dust and sun, to a courtyard where a princess was waiting to chill her pomegranate juice. He made it just in time, barely. There's no plaque for that, no textbook mentions it, but somehow, you know it happened. Or something like it. You linger at the bottom of the pit for a moment longer. Then, slowly, you begin to climb out. The air warms with each step. The walls glow faintly in the moonlight. You glance back once. Just before you reach the top, the pit waits patiently. It knows it'll be filled again, when the time is right, when the desert decides to give a gift. And outside, in the silent night, that gift is already being coaxed into existence. You emerge from the Yakhchal with a slight squint, as if stepping out of a dream. The outside air, though still warm, now feels oddly harsh in comparison. You're more aware of the dryness in your throat, the sweat settling into your collar. But above you, the stars have multiplied, scattered like salt across dark silk. And in front of you, just beyond the dome's shadow, lies something even more surprising, a shallow rectangular pool. Not for bathing, not for drinking, but for freezing. This is the real secret to the impossible ice, the night ice, as some quietly called it. In the ancient Persian ice-making method, the freezing didn't always begin inside the dome. It began here, under open skies, in these flat, narrow channels dug into the ground. You crouch beside one. The surface is still and clear, reflecting constellations that have shifted little since Cyrus the Great walked this land. The water is only a few fingers deep, maybe 5 centimeters at most. It's the shallowness that matters. The thin layer allows for faster heat loss during the night, radiating warmth into the vast emptiness above. No covers, no shade. The key was full exposure to the cold of space. It's called radiative cooling, a principle so old, even the stars seem to yawn with familiarity. Each winter night, when conditions were just right, dry air, no wind, cloudless skies, ice would slowly form on the surface of these pools. The watchman would wait until it was solid enough to harvest, then carefully slide the sheets of ice out before dawn and carry them to the dome for storage. You run a finger along the edge of the pool, imagining how careful they had to be. A misstep could crack the ice, a warm breeze could, and 2 hours of slow, patient freezing. Historians still debate just how effective these shallow pools were in warmer climates. Some suggest they only worked reliably in desert winters. Others think the placement, often in the shadow of a yakhchal or alongside canets, created microclimates that boosted the odds. Either way, these pools were like quiet little laboratories under the stars. A pair of sandals scuffs somewhere behind you. You turn slightly. It's not another tourist, it's a night watchman. Not quite real, maybe, but you see him clearly. His robe is rough woven, cinched at the waist. He carries a small lantern, the kind that doesn't quite cut through the dark but keeps him company. His face is bored, sunburnt, and mostly mustache. He nods at the pool, as if to say, "Yep, it's doing its job." You follow him as he makes his rounds around the perimeter of the ice pools, checking for small animals, loose debris, or any cracks in the stonework. The job isn't glamorous. It involves long hours, sore ankles, and the constant fear of a dog jumping in just for fun. But it's vital, because one ruined pool can mean a wasted night. And in this desert, every cool breath is precious. The watchman stops at a low bench, pulls out a cloth, wraps something from under it, maybe a fig cake, and chews slowly, staring at the sky. You sit beside him. There's nothing to say. He knows the desert better than most, knows when the wind is too warm, or when the jackals howl earlier than usual. You wonder if he believes the moon helps freeze the water, or if that's just what he tells the children. The cloth over his shoulder is damp. He soaks it before his shift begins and lets the slow evaporation keep him cool. It's a tiny, ancient trick of thermodynamics, one that echoes the very principle of the yakhchal. Evaporation draws heat away. That's the secret to the whole thing. No spales, just sweat, air, and patience. And still, there's debate. Did they really understand the science? Or was it all intuition and inherited wisdom? Historians still argue whether Persian engineers had a formal grasp of thermodynamic theory, or simply watched, learned, and copied what worked. Either way, they knew enough to freeze water in a desert. You glance back at the pool. A thin skin has formed, just the beginning of ice. It twinkles under the stars, barely visible, easily missed, but the watchman sees it. He always does. Beside the pool, there's a small clay structure, more of a shelter than a house. It's where the workers rest between shifts, where they keep tools, and maybe a little tea, brewed bitter and strong. You peek inside and find nothing but a wooden stool and a pile of folded wool. There's something comforting in its emptiness. This is the heart of Persian ice culture, not the dome itself, but this quiet choreography between wind, water, and human routine. You don't force the desert to make ice, you invite it. Gently, consistently, and sometimes, it says yes. A gentle breeze rolls across the plain now, and the air cools just a touch. You close your eyes, just for a second. The stars continue their slow arc above. The pool holds its breath. The desert listens. In the morning, if the air is kind, the surface will crackle under the lightest touch. And someone, yawning and shivering in the early chill, will scoop it up and carry it away. The first light of dawn creeps across the desert like a spill of warm milk. The stars begin to vanish, one by one, and the pools of water take on a faint pink glow. It's time. You rise slowly, brushing the sand from your legs, and walk quietly to the edge of the shallow freezing basin. The night's efforts are visible now, a thin, crystalline layer across the surface of the water. Not thick, but firm, delicate as a dragonfly's wing. A small cluster of workers arrives just as you do, wrapped in layers, their breath faint ghosts in the cool morning. They work quickly, in silence, no clanking tools, no loud conversation. Just gentle scooping, gloved hands, and straw-lined baskets being carefully filled with sheets of ice, one after another. You watch as one man uses a flat wooden paddle to loosen a brittle edge. The ice slides, clean and perfect, onto the cloth. Another man stacks them with the casual grace of someone who's done this hundreds of times, and somehow, here in the desert, there's ice, not a miracle, just method. These workers are part of a larger rhythm, the freezing pools, the Yakhchal, the camel paths and mountain springs, it's all connected. The system depends on timing and care, and everyone, from the lowest carrier to the master architect, knows their part. You follow one of the workers as he hoists a basket of ice and starts the short walk to the dome. His sandals flap against the sand. His shoulders move in a practiced rhythm, evenly balanced. You can hear the faint clink of ice on ice inside the basket like the softest wine chimes. As you reach the Yakhchal, he ducks into the entrance, disappearing into that cool, quiet world once more. You hesitate. It's already warmer than it was. The sun is just beginning to peek over the edge of the horizon, and the temperature is rising. Fast. Inside, he lowers the ice carefully into the pit, adding straw between the layers. Not hay straw. It insulates without holding moisture. The difference matters when you're trying to preserve ice under 40-degree sun for months. You reach out and touch a nearby wall. It's already beginning to absorb the day's heat. The bricks won't stay cool forever. But for now, they still carry the memory of night. It wasn't always so simple. Early versions of these ice houses were less reliable, shallower pits, thinner walls, sometimes built too close to town, where heat from cooking fires could ruin everything. Over time, improvements were made. Brick formulas were refined, wall thickness adjusted, entrance angles calculated to avoid direct sunlight for as long as possible. It's a reminder that no tradition arrives fully formed. The first Yakhchal builders didn't have blueprints. They had instincts, trial and error, and plenty of patience. Over generations, they built a knowledge base passed down in sun-wrinkled hands and whispered advice. And even with all that, it wasn't foolproof. Some seasons were too warm, some years brought dust storms that clogged the pools. There were times when entire winter efforts were lost to a single cracked wall or careless oversight. Historians still argue whether these failures were treated as natural misfortunes or human error. Were there punishments? Was the role of the ice guardian sacred, or just another labor job? We don't have records detailed enough to say that the structures themselves dozens still standing suggest these domes were not merely practical, they were cherished, cared for, and now, as the sun rises higher, you begin to see the larger picture. It wasn't just about having cold water or fruit juice, ice was used in medicine. Feverish children were wrapped in cloths soaked in meltwater. Stomach ailments were soothed with chilled syrups. Noble families used ice not just to stay comfortable, but to project calm. Collected luxury. See, we are so stable, we control even the heat. There's a joke you hear, whispered between workers as they lift another basket into the pit. Only the truly powerful sweat into cold drinks. You smile. It's true. You step back into the sun now, blinking. The light is blinding, sharp like sugar crystals. Already, the pools are evaporating. What wasn't harvested is melting fast. The window has closed for the day, but that's how it works. One night, one harvest, one cold dawn at a time. A few bows run past, laughing, barefoot, chasing a dog with a stick. One of them is licking something. Could it be? You lean closer. Yes, a sliver of ice, wrapped in cloth. Maybe stolen, maybe gifted. He sucks on it like treasure. Eyes wide. And for a moment, everything around him disappears. It's just the cool, sweet sting of winter in his mouth. You can't help but admire the absurdity, the determination, the fragile miracle of desert ice. It doesn't belong here, and yet, here it is, and someone, somewhere, built the tools to make it happen. Above you, a hawk circles lazily. Below, in the dome, the ice sleeps again, and so do you. Almost. You leave the workers behind, their morning routine folding seamlessly into the rising heat, and follow the lazy trail of dust leading back toward the town. But instead of heading for rooftops or shaded courtyards, you drift east toward a low, uneven ridge. There, a narrow dirt path winds along a series of stone channels, barely wide enough for 2 feet side by side. You follow it, drawn by the distant sound of trickling water. What you're looking at now isn't just part of the scenery, it's part of the system. These are the qanats, the arteries of ancient Persian infrastructure. You crouch beside one, running your hand just above the slow-moving water. It's not cold, exactly, but it's definitely cooler than the air. Quietly persistent, the stream winds its way underground and above ground, stretching like a lazy snake across the desert floor. Qanats were ingenious hand-dug tunnels that sloped ever so gently from mountain aquifers down into settlements and farmlands, dug entirely by hand. Mind you, with nothing but picks, baskets, and an uncanny sense of vertical geometry. A miscalculation of even a few degrees in slope, and the water would stagnate, or worse, reverse. And somehow, the Persians got it right, repeatedly. You pass a vent, one of many vertical shafts that dot the qanat system like pinholes. These allowed workers access during construction and maintenance. They also provided just enough airflow to keep the water fresh and, importantly for our sleepy topic, cool. In some places, the qanats actually passed near or underneath yakhchāls, helping to chill the air and maintain that precious subterranean cold pocket. You pause at a bend in the channel where the water burbles over a stone lip. A tiny frog, probably regretting every life choice that led it to a desert stream, blinks up at you before hopping away. Even here, there is life, slow, deliberate, but life nonetheless. You sit down on the edge and imagine yourself as the man who checks this route daily. A water tender. His job is simple in theory. Monitor the flow, clear blockages, patch leaks. But in practice, it's a lifetime of walking the same path under the same sun with the same tools. A wooden rake, a palm-woven bucket, maybe a goat or two for company, although they're not particularly helpful with hydraulics. His shoes would be thick leather, cracked with salt from long walks. His clothes, linen, layered, sun-bleached. His water skin always full, his pace never rushed. The desert punishes haste, and that quiet man is essential. Because without this slow-moving trickle of water, the pools wouldn't fill. The ice wouldn't freeze, the yakhchal would sit empty. And somewhere, a nobleman would be forced to drink his pomegranate syrup at room temperature, a fate worse than exile. There's a strange peace in thinking about how much of ancient Persian success hinged on infrastructure that required almost no moving parts. No gears, no combustion, just incline, gravity, and the willingness to dig a perfectly sloped tunnel through hard-packed earth for several kilometers without losing your mind. Historians still argue how these tunnels were planned. Did they use sightlines from mountain to plain, smoke signals from one shaft to the next? Oral tradition passed between generations of specialist families. One theory suggests teams of engineers used wooden sighting frames and string to align shafts, guided by celestial calculations and, sometimes, plain old trial and error. One fringe claim hotly debated proposes that singing played a role on sustained tones echoed down the shafts to measure straightness and resonance. That might sound romantic, but let's be honest, it's also wonderfully impractical. Still, there's a certain music to the idea. A cornet song echoing underground as men dig in rhythm, breath and dust rising like incense. You lean back now, elbows in the warm dust, and let your mind drift. The water beside you gurgles gently, somewhere. Nearby, a palm tree's fronds rustle in the breeze. You imagine lying here for hours, watching the sun creep across the sky, while the aqueduct babbles beside you like a patient friend. It's humbling. This idea that some of the world's earliest engineering marvels weren't massive temples or sky-reaching towers but quiet, invisible tunnels that carried life beneath the earth. Not for glory, not for gods, just for getting things done. You begin to notice how everything around you connects. The water from the mountains flows here. The shallow pools freeze it. The Yakhchal stores it. The people use it for healing, for cooking, for cooling sore feet. It's a whole civilization built on moderation, rhythm, and adaptation. Nothing rushes, everything persists. A donkey brays somewhere down the ridge, reminding you that townspeople are stirring. Soon, women will gather at the community basins to wash. Children will splash their hands into the canet's edge. The quiet of the morning will give way to slow chatter and metal bowls clinking on stone. But for now, it's just you, and the water. And the low hum of a system so old and so good that modern engineers still study it with a mix of eye and quiet envy. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to rest. The earth is warm, the air is still, and the water keeps moving, one careful centimeter at a time. You wake to the sound of someone humming, a low, tuneless melody, half whistled, half sigh. It takes you a moment to realize where you are, the cornet trickling beside you, the sun now higher, hotter, and decidedly more insistent. You blink and sit up, shading your eyes with your hand. There's a figure ahead, near one of the clay mixing pits. He's up to his shins in a slurry of mud, straw, ash, and somehow goat hair. His feet squelch slowly through the thick, sticky mixture. He's building bricks, or more precisely, remaking them, because the desert eats even stone over time. And a Yakhchal without maintenance is just a ruin waiting to happen. This gritty, grimy task is how those beautiful domes you've been admiring were born. Brick by muddy brick. You wander over, curious. The man nods to acknowledge you but doesn't stop. He's in rhythm now. Scoop, stomp, turn. It's almost a dance. He's making Saruja's special mortar the ancient Persians concocted that's both waterproof and heat-resistant, kind of like the superhero of ancient construction materials. It's made from a blend of fine clay, sand, lime, ash, egg whites when available, and yes, goat hair, because why not? The goat hair acts like modern fiberglass, helping bind the mixture and prevent cracking. It's both brilliant and weirdly gross. You kneel to pick up a half-dried brick. It's surprisingly light and warm, the surface etched with finger marks from where it was turned and pressed into a mold. These bricks aren't fired tin cans. They dry slowly under the sun. Time does the hard work. The Yakhchal walls were made of thousands of these stacked in overlapping spirals to form the dome, each layer carefully offset to add strength. The walls were sometimes up to 2 meters thick, tapering inward as they rose. This shape didn't just look impressive, it served multiple thermal purposes. It minimized sun exposure during the day, while maximizing the amount of interior volume that stayed cool. Historians still debate where this dome design originated. Was it a local innovation, borrowed from Mesopotamian granaries? Influenced by wine tower architecture? The honest answer is, probably a mix. Knowledge in the ancient world moved in mysterious, meandering ways like the canets themselves. You wander over to a half-constructed dome, paused mid-rise like a frozen wave. Wooden scaffolding leans against the interior wall, thin and sun-bleached. A child scrambles up and down the planks, delivering tools to his father, who's balancing on a narrow beam with a bucket of mortar. You flinch. He doesn't. This is just another Tuesday. The air inside the unfinished structure is stifling. No shade yet, no airflow, but you can feel what it will become. A sanctuary of temperature, a chamber of stillness. You imagine how, months from now, the walls will be plaster, the floor swept, the ice pit packed. Someone will walk in from the blinding heat and sigh with relief, and none of that magic would happen without the man squelching barefoot in his goat hair mortar. Outside, you spot a woman hauling water from a connet spout into a clay basin. She carries it carefully to another pit, where fresh bricks will be left to dry. It's communal, this kind of work. No one owns the knowledge, and everyone has a hand in shaping it. Children help mold bricks, elders check the consistency. Even the donkeys get involved, hauling baskets of straw from nearby fields with an expression of deep and amused resignation. You look down at your own hands, dusty, slightly sticky. You try patting together a brick of your own just for fun. It comes out crooked, lumpy, not terrible, but definitely not Yakhchal grade. One of the brickmakers glances at it and raises an eyebrow. First one's free, he seems to say, before returning to his work. There's a lovely absurdity here. Imagine building a giant fridge, one that lasts centuries, without screws, without refrigeration, without insulation foam, just mud, time, and a deep respect for the elements. You don't force the desert to behave, you persuade it, gently, brick by brick. Nearby, someone smears a fresh wall with a final layer of lime plaster, smoothing it out in wide, circular strokes. The surface gleams white in the sun, dazzling and hot to the touch. This outer layer reflects heat, helping to protect the inner sanctuary of cold. Once fully dried, it will be as smooth as a bird's egg and nearly as tough. Historians still argue how long a well-made yakhchal could last before repairs were needed. Some records suggest decades, others say they required constant touch-ups. Either way, it's clear that these structures were never finished in the modern sense. They were living buildings, breathed on by wind, fed by human effort, shaped by generations. You step back now and look at the half-formed dome. It's beautiful even in its incomplete state. A promise of shade, of ice, of human persistence. You let your eyes trace the curve of the rising wall and imagine what it would sound like once finished. The echo of footsteps inside, the soft drip of meltwater, the rustle of straw insulation shifting with the breeze. And for a moment, you feel incredibly small, not in a bad way. Just aware that you're standing in the middle of something that worked not just once, but for thousands of years. Something that kept people cool, calm, and collected long before compressors or coolants or the comforting hum of a modern fridge. The worker waves to you, grinning through sweat. His feet are still in the mud. You nod back and walk on, a little lighter than before. You follow the curve of the drying dome, brushing your fingers along the edges of stacked bricks still warm from the morning sun. There's something satisfying about their roughness, something deeply human. These walls weren't poured in a factory or cut by lasers. They were shaped by hands, thousands of them, over time. Each pressed with the same slow patience, and each a part of something larger. You step away from the construction site and toward the older, more weathered dome you visited last night. It's quieter now. The watchman's shift has ended. The pools are empty of ice, the straw baskets set aside, waiting for evening's labor to begin again. Still, the air around the structure feels cooler. And this time, you're not going inside, you're delivering ice. At the edge of a shaded courtyard, a mule stands tethered to a low wooden post, its flanks twitching lazily as flies try their luck. Draped across its back is a saddle made not of leather, but of woven palm fibers, and lashed. On either side are two small clay chests. Inside them, precious blocks of early morning ice, wrapped in straw and cloth like sleeping infants. You step up, checking the bundles. The insulation is rudimentary, a clever layers of dried reeds, bound with wool string, then sealed with a thin smear of clay around the rims to slow the melting. You lift one bundle, surprised by its weight and chill. Not frosty anymore, but still firm, still cold. Your job, today, is simple. deliver this ice to a noble family's summer tent across the dry fields. You clamber onto the mule with more effort than grace. It doesn't care. It starts walking, steady and stubborn, following a narrow dirt path away from the dome, past low adobe homes, and through clusters of olive trees twisted into wine-sculpted poses. Each step jostles the saddle, but the clay chests remain steady. You can hear the faint clink of ice shifting inside like the sound of coins in a pouch. As you ride, the landscape changes. The flat desert gives way to scruffy orchards, vines curl up hand-tied trellises. Beehives rest beneath pomegranate trees. The road winds beside another connet, half-shaded now, its water sparkling with midday light. A pair of young bows splash at the edge, shrieking with joy. One notices you and freezes, eyes wide. The moment he sees the clay containers, he points and yells, "Yak, ice." You tip your head slightly, as if to say, "Yes, but it's not for you." They laugh anyway, chasing after the mule for a few paces before peeling off, barefoot and grinning. It's strange how something as simple as ice could hold this much power. It's not just utility, it's prestige. In ancient Persia, ice was more than a temperature difference, it was a statement. If you could serve cold drinks or preserve sweet treats in summer, you were someone who understood the desert and bent it to your will. Your destination comes into view, a large canvas tent, billowing slightly in the warm breeze, ornate. Tassels flutter at its edges. Beyond the tent, 'tis a low stone platform shaded by woven palm mats, where a cluster of people lounges on cushions, sipping drinks and fanning themselves with stiff paper fans. A servant approaches you as you dismount. No words are exchanged. Just a nod, a gesture, and the ice bundle is taken. He moves quickly. Any delay could mean melt and disappears into the tent's side flap. Inside, you imagine what happens next. The ice will be crushed with stone pestles and mixed with flour syrups, rose water, perhaps, or saffron-infused date juice. Small ceramic bowls will be filled and passed around. And when someone raises a spoon to their lips, the shock of cold against the dessert heat will bring wide eyes and delighted sighs. Historians still argue about just how widely available this kind of service was. Some claim ice was strictly a luxury of the elite. Others argue that, while nobles had it more often, festivals and public feasts occasionally made it accessible to common folk. Fringe scholars even suggest that ice was used in religious ceremonies, offered to the gods, or used to cool ritual objects before prayer. The truth is likely a mix, part indulgence, part medicine, part symbolism. And then there's the question of preservation. How far could ice travel? How long could it last? Tests with modern replicas of clay containers suggest that, if packed carefully, ice could survive for hours, even a full day in desert heat. That made it valuable not just in cities, but along trade routes where chilled goods could be exchanged like currency. Ice didn't just refresh, it connected. You accept a small token of thanks from the household, a cloth pouch containing what smells like dried figs and crushed pistachio. You sling it over your shoulder and begin your return. The mule's slightly lighter now, its mood improved. As you ride back, the desert stretches again wide, open, endless. The sun sits overhead like a heavy thought, and the path feels longer somehow, but you don't mind. You're part of a chain now. One link in a process that begins in water, becomes ice, and ends in someone's sigh of relief. It's a good kind of smallness, a cool kind of purpose. You pass the bows again. This time, they wave without chasing, and somewhere far behind you, inside the shaded dome, new ice is already being planned for tomorrow. By the time you return to the outskirts of town, the air has turned thick, hot enough that the dirt beneath your sandals is softening, just a little, and the shade of even the smallest palm feels like a miracle. Your mule lets out a long sigh, as if to say, "That's enough nobility for one day," and trots off toward a water trough without asking permission. Fair, you, meanwhile, step into a covered market lane, where the fabric awnings stretch above like lazy sails, casting a patchwork of fluttering shade. Everything is slower here now. Merchants fan themselves lazily. Children sleep in hammocks made from date palm leaves. Someone pours tea and immediately regrets it, because steam in this other is a cruel joke. And then there it is. You round a corner and find yourself in a quiet little square. At the center, seated on a mat surrounded by tiny clay bowls, sits a woman. Her hands are gloved in thick wool despite the heat. A sign beside her painted in faded script reads, something like, "Cold sweet syrup, only if you behave." She smiles when she sees you and pats the mat. You sit, still warm from the rye, and watch as she lifts the lid of a wide ceramic bowl nestled in a basket of straw. Inside, ice, fragile flakes, some are already melting, but enough remains. She scoops a bit into a shallow dish, then ladles over it a slow stream of deep red syrup. Pomegranate and rose, maybe a hint of something floral, basil, or violets. You take a bite, and it's glorious. The cold isn't shocking, it's soft. A kind of quiet relief that spreads across your tongue and cools your face from the inside out. You close your eyes and breathe through your nose, letting the desert disappear for a moment. This is what they call sharbat, a chilled drink or dessert syrup served over snow or ice, depending on the season. It was beloved across the Persian world, not just as a treat, but as a sign of hospitality and refinement. There were hundreds of variations: lemon with mint, grape molasses with crushed almonds, even sour cherry syrup spiced with cinnamon and a hint of salt. Each family had its own recipe, each city its favorite. And yes, ice played a vital role. Sharbat without chill was like bread without fire, edible, but not quite right. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions of sharbat were strictly medicinal or always indulgent. Some ancient texts describe them as tonics for heat stroke, prepared by apothecaries with great seriousness. Others describe festive banquets, with silver trays of chilled drinks being passed around to music and laughter. Either way, it became a staple of summer life in cities like Yazd, Shiraz, and Isfahan, each with their own yakhchāls, each with their own rituals of cold. The woman next to you hums as she prepares another dish, this time for an elderly man who lowers himself carefully onto a nearby stool. His hands tremble slightly, but when he sips from the bowl, he smiles with something close to reverence. You notice that no one here gulps, no one rushes. The cold is not just a taste, it's a tempo. You're meant to savor it, to treat it like poetry. She offers you a second serving, this one pale yellow. You ask what's in it. She answers with a shrug and a grin, as if to say, try it and see. You do. It's floral, almost like chewing on sunlight. A fringe of citrus lingers behind. Maybe bergamot, maybe something else entirely. You sit with your bowl, your feet tucked under you, and watch the square go on living. The desert wind pulls at the corners of the awnings. Somewhere, someone drops a basket, a donkey brays. The woman adjusts the straw insulation under her bowl of ice, carefully patting it down like tucking in a child. She's not running a cafe. Not really. This is a ritual, a performance, or a minor. And as you take another slow bite, you realize something. This isn't just about beating the heat. It's about having control over it, for a moment, at least, in a world where the sun dictates everything, from when you rise to when you sleep. To be able to cool your own drink is nothing short of power. But here's the twist: it's not wielded like a weapon. It's shared, quietly, gracefully, with bowls and smiles and just enough syrup to stain your lips. You thank the woman and rise, placing a small coin in her bowl. She doesn't count it. Just nods, already ladling out the next round for a pair of giggling sisters who clearly plan to misbehave just enough to earn a third helping. You walk away slowly. Not because you're tired, but because you're calm, cooled from the inside. Your skin still sweats, your clothes still cling, but something deeper in you has been put on pause. The ice did that, or maybe it was the way it was offered. You pass through another alley, where a boy sells slices of melon kept under damp cloths. A cat naps in the crook of a clay wall. Somewhere above, a bell chimes to mark the slow approach of afternoon. And just like that, the dessert feels a little more generous, little more. You wander from the market square with syrup still clinging to the corners of your mouth and a slight chill lingering at the back of your throat. The sun is overhead now, heavy and golden. Even the shadows seem to sweat. But somehow, everything feels softer, less demanding. You follow the narrow road toward the city's central quarter. It's quieter here, less of the bustling chatter and more of a composed, curated hum. Stone courtyards lying either side of the road, shaded by lattice screens and swaying fabrics dyed in warm reds and muted blues. A few noble servants hurry past, their linen robes pressed and their brows glistening with respectable perspiration. Your path leads to a wide archway carved with elegant calligraphy. Inside, a private garden. You hesitate for a moment then step through. It's like walking into another world. The air is cooler, not dramatically, but just enough. High walls shield the space from the harshest sun, and slender channels of water cut through the taping stones in precise geometric patterns, fed by the ever-reliable connet. Cypress trees lean inward over raised flower beds, birds flit in the canopy. A peacock because of course there's a peacock glares at you before deciding you're not interesting enough to address. And at the far end of the garden, seated on a wide stone bench, is a man with a curved nose and a robe far too fine to be stained. In front of him, resting delicately on a silver tray, sits a bowl of ice, not just ice-carved ice, shaped into a small dome, decorated with mint leaves and thin slivers of candied lemon peel. You're witnessing something subtle but unmistakable. Ice, used as power. The noble dips a spoon into the dish, not because he needs refreshment, but because he can. Around him, a few attendants hover, one fanning gently, another holding a damp cloth for his hands. You hear him chuckle. A faint, dismissive sound, probably directed at a story someone just told. This isn't indulgence, it's performance. In ancient Persian court culture, displays of wealth were rarely loud. They were precise, curated. You didn't show off by building the biggest house, you showed off by having cold melon slices served in a garden at high noon. You demonstrated your mastery not by challenging the sun, but by appearing immune to it. Ice, in this setting, is not refreshment, it's a statement. A whisper that says, the laws of nature bend slightly in my presence. You take a seat nearby, unnoticed, watching the scene unfold. The noble gestures toward a scribe seated cross-legged beside him. They exchange a few words about shipment schedules, probably figs from the north or silks from the coast. The scribe dutifully records them on a wax tablet, his own sweat slowly smearing the ink. But the noble, dry as a desert beetle's sarcasm. Historians still argue whether ice was seen primarily as a luxury of comfort or a signal of political control. Some point to old ledgers that tracked ice distribution as tightly as tax revenue, suggesting it was a resource managed like gold. Others believe the nobility's obsession with coolness had symbolic undertones, purity, stillness, even divine favor. A ruler who could produce ice in summer must surely be aligned with higher forces. One fringe theory proposes that elite Persian families used ice as a subtle social weapon, serving chilled drinks only to favored guests, or refusing them at the exact moment a relationship soured. It's petty, it's theatrical, it's deeply human. And if true, it means someone's summer thirst once triggered a generational feud. You picture it, a guest takes his place on the carpet, expecting a sherbet. None arrives, he sips warm water instead, his insult carefully documented in poetic verse. The offense echoes for decades. The noble, before you finish his treat, dabs his lips with a cloth, and murmurs something to an attendant, who promptly disappears into the shade. A moment later, a new bowl of ice appears, this one shaped like a small flower. You can't help but marvel at the speed. Somewhere, a servant is sprinting like his career depends on it, and it probably does. But here's the quiet truth. Even the noble is bound to the rhythms of ice. It must be made, moved, and delivered before it vanishes. No matter how high you rise in this world, you are never entirely free from the laws of melting. And yet, the illusion of mastery remains. That's what makes it work. You stand quietly and step away from the scene, leaving the noble to his chilled dominion. The garden fades behind you as the path opens back into the city's stone-lined streets. A breeze passes through, oddly cool, and you pause to enjoy it before it disappears. Even now, you're thinking about that bowl of carved ice. How fleeting it is, how carefully it's made. How much meaning can be packed into a few mouthfuls of melt. Somewhere behind a shuttered window, someone is fanning themselves and muttering about the good ice. Somewhere else, a servant is wrapping another block in straw, whispering a prayer to keep it whole until delivery. And you're just passing through, one quiet observer in a city that, somehow, turned water into power without ever raising its voice. You slip through the city's outer edge just as the sun begins to tip westward, shadows stretching across sandstone walls like lazy cats. The midday torpor is easing slightly, but not much. The air remains thick and cold and slow. You follow a dry path eastward, away from the nobles' courtyards, toward the far reaches of town where fewer people live, and fewer still wander. There, tucked between a low ridge and the wine-scoured edge of a dry plain, lies something less polished, a different kind of cold keeping. You find yourself before another Yakhchal, but this one's older, darker, and half buried in dust. Not ruined, exactly, but tired. Its dome slouches to one side like a sleeping animal. The mud brick is cracked in places, and dry weeds creep along its base. You glance around. No guards, no noble gardens, no chattering guests sipping flower syrup. Just the wind, the sand, and a single wooden door hanging slightly ajar. You slip inside. It's not silent, there's a faint dripping. Somewhere below, the air is cooler, noticeably so, and the familiar smell of dry earth and musty straw fills your lungs. You move slowly down the slope, your feet careful on the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of coming and going. This isn't a grand dome for elite desserts. It's a working Yakhchal, a place for storage, preservation, survival. Below, clay amphorae are stacked neatly along the edges of the pit, sealed jars filled with dried fruit, stored sherbet syrup, and even medicinal herbs. In the center, the iced pit remains, partially filled with old, compressed snow layered with sawdust. It's not glamorous, it's not pristine, but it's cold. You sit beside it, on a low ledge carved into the wall. It's quiet. Not majestic quiet like a noble's garden, but honest quiet, practical. You imagine the people who come here not in silk, but in rough cotton, hauling bundles, kneeling carefully, measuring out slivers of ice to use for the sick, the weak, or the very old. You remember something you heard in the market, a tale about a boy whose fever wouldn't break until his grandmother brought him a cloth soaked in meltwater from this very pit. Whether it cured him or not, no one remembers. What mattered was the effort. Historians still argue whether Yakhchals like this one were common or rare. Some records suggest most were public works community-managed structures supported by the town itself. Others hint at private ownership, with wealthier families building their own miniaturized pits for personal use. This particular one seems like a hybrid, humble but meticulously maintained, like a communal oven that everyone respects, even if no one truly claims it. You walk the perimeter slowly, noticing small etchings along the inner walls. Not decorations, measurements, tally marks. Perhaps each line represents a delivery, or a season, or a particularly bad summer, and the ice ran out by July. You press your hand to one just to groove, but it holds a kind of memory, as if it remembers hands like yours, tired and hopeful. A creaking sound breaks the stillness. Someone's entered. You freeze for a moment, unsure. But then you hear the soft pad of feet and a familiar rustle. It's a man, thin, sun-creased, carrying a straw basket. He doesn't see you at first. He moves with ease, like someone visiting a family member. Gently, he opens the pit lid, checks the ice, and lowers in a bundle wrapped in cloth fresh ice, harvested before noon. He seals it back, up without fanfare. He spots you now and raises a brow. You nod, staying seated. He shrugs, then walks over to one of the amphorae and taps the lid, listening. Satisfied, he hums a few notes and vanishes again into the brightness outside. That's the rhythm here. Quiet contribution, no ceremony, just care. And here's a fringe theory for you. Some archaeologists believe these humble domes were sometimes used as meeting places, cool sanctuaries, not just for food, but for conversation, a kind of neutral zone, where the desert's heat couldn't follow, and disputes could be discussed with level heads. It's not proven, but you feel the truth of it. It's hard to stay angry, and the air itself seems to whisper, calm down. You lie back now on the cool stone bench, letting your shoulders relax. The dome above you arches in gentle curves, a small vent hole at the top lets in a single beam of dusty light. You track it with your eyes as it shifts slowly along the wall. Time, measured by sunlight, and silence. This place is not majestic, not ceremonial. It doesn't sparkle or impress, but it endures, year after year, holding on to its coal, passing it gently to those who need it. It's the kind of strength you almost don't notice until it's gone. And lying here, you understand something. The magic of ice in the desert isn't in the science or the structure. It's in the way people use it, the quiet reverence, the shared labor. The fact that, even now, In a world full of noise and heat, someone is still preserving coolness not for display, but for care. You exhale slowly, the drip continues, the air holds. And outside, somewhere, the desert waits for night. When you step back into the light, the desert greets you like a slow, warm exhale. The cool breath of the Yakhchal lingers faintly in your clothes, clinging to your sleeves, a memory of chill in a world that has no business being cold. You stretch your arms, take a long breath, and begin to walk again, this time toward the old road that curves around the edge of the village. It's not a bustling thoroughfare anymore, mostly dust and stories now. But once, it carried far more than camels and baskets of apricots. It carried ice. You follow the worn track out of town, toward the horizon where scrubby trees, and under the weight of the wind. There's a soft crunch beneath your feet, fine gravel, loose sand, a hint of something older ground down by time. Ahead of you, nestled between two ridges, is what you've come to find, the caravan path. This is where the real drama of desert ice unfolded. The Caravaniyak, the ice caravan, was a seasonal ritual, a choreography of logistics that makes your modern delivery look like a distracted toddler. Trains of camels would rise before dawn, loaded not with textiles or jewels, but bundles of carefully wrapped ice packed with straw and prayer. They would travel miles across open desert, often through dust storms and across salt flats, to deliver their frostbitten cargo before it disappeared. And they had to move fast. You pause by a low, crumbling stone marker on the roadside, just a waist-high slab with a faint chisel mark, a wayfinding stone, the kind that help guide ice caravans through otherwise featureless plains. Imagine walking for hours under that sky, with nothing but markers like this one to convince you you're not completely lost. You crouch and touch the stone. It's warm, but not hot. Like it remembers cooler hands once leaned here. The caravans didn't travel during the day, not really. They started in the early hours, moved with the sunrise behind them, and paused through the fiercest heat in shaded stops known as sarira. These were tiny stone shelters, dug partly underground, where the camels could rest and the ice could be checked, repacked, and sometimes even partially replenished from secret storage domes buried nearby. Historians still argue how far these ice caravans could go before their precious cargo melted to nothing. Some say up to 60 kilometers a day, under ideal conditions. Others argue the distance was shorter, especially in high summer. The route mattered, the time of year mattered, the angle of the sun even mattered. What's certain is this: it wasn't easy. One miscalculation, and your cargo was a puddle before noon. You crest a ridge now and look out over a flat, shimmering expanse. You can just imagine it, lines of camels, laden with straw bundles, tied with wool rope, plodding in rhythm. Their drivers wrapped in layers to trap their own body moisture, walking alongside them with sun-darkened hands and ice-wet clothes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Some of the caravans didn't carry ice for nobles or cities. They brought it to the fringes, to remote farms, monasteries, military outposts. One tablet fragment even suggests ice was once used to cool ink for royal scribes so it wouldn't smear in the heat. Whether that's true or a poetic embellishment is unclear, but the point remains: ice mattered in places you'd never expect. One of the strangest records ever translated from early Persian sources, possibly half-fiction, describes a wedding held on a dry plateau in midsummer, where a single bowl of ice water was passed hand to hand like a holy object. Each guest took a sip and wept, not because of the ceremony, but because the water was cold. You begin to understand the reverence. Ice wasn't just useful, it was emotional, a kind of portable mercy. A moment of relief in a landscape that never apologized for its heat. A bird cries somewhere in the distance, a hawk or a crow, and your thoughts scatter like startled goats. You take one last look at the path ahead. No caravans today. Just you, the wind, and a few stubborn bushes defying their own thirst. You turn and make your way back toward town, back down the slope. As you descend, you notice something unexpected: a pile of stones arranged neatly beside the road. At first, it looks accidental, but then you see it for what it is: a cache. Someone once buried ice here, just enough to keep something cool for a short time. Maybe it was a resting caravan. Maybe a father bringing ice for a sick child in the next village. Maybe it wasn't about ice at all, just the tools used to carry it, left behind for someone else to use. It's a reminder: These routes weren't just about goods. They were about trust, continuity, the knowledge that even in the middle of nowhere, someone had walked this path before, and someone would again. You squat beside the stone pile and close your eyes. You can almost hear the crunch of camel hooves, the chink of ice in clay jars, the low mutter of a driver cursing the heat with fond familiarity. You're not alone out here, not really. Just traveling at a different time. By the time you return to the town's outskirts, the sun has dipped a little, just enough to stretch the shadows longer and tint everything in a golden haze. You walk slower now, not because you're tired, but because the world has softened. Even the desert seems to be exhaling, letting go of its white-knuckled grip on the heat for just a moment. There's music ahead, faint and rhythmic, a flute perhaps, and the gentle thud of hand drums echoing off adobe walls. You follow it instinctively, drawn toward a courtyard strung with colored fabric. And as you turn the corner, you find yourself in the middle of a celebration. It's a wedding, not a grand, royal affair. Something humbler, a village wedding, full of cousins and laughter and the smell of cardamom. Women in bright dresses swirl through the air like flowers caught in a breeze. The men clap along, some already halfway through their third date-paced suite. In the center, the bride and groom sit on a raised dais beneath a canopy of pomegranate branches and dyed linen, and off to the side, just barely out of view but commanding attention in its own way, is a single, wide ceramic basin filled with ice. It sparkles in the evening light, covered in a thin cloth to keep the flies off and shaded with a makeshift awning. Around it, a line of cups, a jug of pale rose water, and what looks like slivers of frozen fruit. You smile. This, clearly, is the centerpiece. You approach slowly, careful not to interrupt the woman tending. The ice bowl waves you over and lifts the cloth to reveal the contents, crushed ice, still crisp, packed with sprigs of mint and citrus peel. She dips a ladle in and pours over a scoop of thickened syrup into a wide copper cup. The syrup pools at the bottom, turning the drink a glowing pink. She hands it to you with the practiced grace of someone who's done this 100 times. It's cold. Cold enough to make you close your eyes and sigh without meaning to. Somewhere behind you, someone laughs, delighted at your reaction. That's the power of this moment. Because in ancient Persia, weddings weren't just about unions. They were about endurance, about family, about setting the tone for decades to come. And serving ice at such a gathering, especially in summer, wasn't just hospitality. It was a quiet promise. Even here, even in this heat, you'll be taken care of. You find a seat on a low wall near a group of elders playing a quiet game with pebbles. They nod to you, and one reaches for his own cup of sherbet. You watch as a child runs past, shrieking with joy at his mouth stained blue from some frozen treat. He waves a tiny flag made of woven grass. His older sister follows behind, slower, holding a flower crown that's already lost most of its structure to the heat. You sip again. The drink is cooling. Yes, but there's something else, something deeper. It's a marker. A sensory proof that you're part of this community, even if only for an evening. Historians still argue over how common it was to have ice at events like these. Some records suggest it was reserved for nobility. Others insist that rural communities often pooled their resources to secure a small delivery from nearby yakhchāls during special occasions. The truth probably sits somewhere in the middle, like most good stories. Not frequent, but not unheard of, rare enough to feel magical. You finish your drink and hand the cup back. The woman rinses it quickly in a basin of clean water and sets it down with the others, her movements practiced and rhythmic. You glance over to see the bride and groom now dancing slowly, their hands clasped, moving in small, careful circles as the drums pulse steadily. Their faces are calm, focused. You can't help but wonder if they'll remember the eyes more clearly than the vows. There's a moment, one of those tiny, accidental ones, when a breeze kicks up and flutters the cloth over the ice bowl. A bit of snow spills over the rim and lands on the clay tiles below. A child darts forward and scoops it up with a squeal, pressing it to his cheeks as if it's treasure. And truly, it is, because here, in this place, at this time, ice is more than refreshment. Its presence, its protection, it's proof that something fragile can survive, even flourish, in a harsh world. It's a metaphor that never needs explaining. You lean back on your hands and just breathe. The wedding continues around you, voices rising and falling like waves, lanterns are being lit now, small clay dishes with flickering flames, casting long shadows and orange halos on every smiling face. Somewhere nearby, someone begins singing, not loudly, just enough for the melody to carry on the wine. You close your eyes for a moment, letting it all settle. The taste of sherbet still lingers. The celebration lingers behind you, slowly fading into the warm twilight hum of the village. You slip away unnoticed. No one expects a stranger to stay for the last dance and follow a winding lane back toward the quieter edges of town. The sky overhead has shifted again, soft lavender giving way to indigo, stars waking up one by one. And though the wedding fades, your mind drifts elsewhere. To failure, not the romantic kind, the practical kind. Because for every night the desert gave up its ice so generously, there were nights when it didn't, nights when the sky clouded just enough, when the wind refused to cooperate, when the temperatures hovered maddeningly above freezing and all the careful preparation dissolved into puddles before dawn. You round a bend and find yourself staring at a ruin. A half-collapsed dome, leaning awkwardly to one side, its top sheared off like a cracked egg. The walls are pocked with erosion. Grasses sprout from between the bricks. One side has caved in completely, revealing the hollow cavity within. You step closer. There's something solemn about it, not tragic, just still. You don't feel sorrow here, just patience, and maybe a quiet reminder that even the cleverest ideas eventually surrender to time. This yakhchal, once proud and functional, simply didn't make it. Maybe the walls were too thin. Maybe someone forgot to patch a crack one summer and the winter rains did the rest. Or maybe it served its purpose and was left to rest. You crouch beside the jagged hole in its side and peer in. No ice here. Just stones, dry earth, and fragments of old straw. The pit has filled in with debris, like the yakhchal is slowly trying to return to the land that made it. You touch the wall, it crumbles slightly under your fingers. But some of the inner layers are still firm, still packed with lime and ash, still holding on to the memory of cold. Historians still argue how frequently yakhchals failed. Some believe that, thanks to their simple design, most lasted for generations. Others argue that maintenance was so constant and unforgiving that any lapse, whether through war, drought, or simple forgetfulness, could doom the whole structure. One fringe theory even suggests that collapsed yakhchals were sometimes viewed as omens, the cold heart of the community gone soft. You sit down on a fallen beam and look up through the open sky where a dome once peaked. A single star hangs there now, framed perfectly in the jagged circle of broken bricks. It winks at you, like it knows this isn't the only failed attempt buried in the sand. And you realize this too is part of the story. Because yakhchals weren't magical machines, they were experiments. A balance between knowledge and weather, between design and climate, between hope and physics. Sometimes they worked beautifully, sometimes they cracked, collapsed, or cooked their contents into slush before new. The important thing wasn't the guarantee, it was the trying. And that's very human, isn't it? To try to hold on to something fleeting, to carve out cold in the middle of heat, to build a dome of mud and straw and say, yes, this will keep my sherbet safe. You smile. A desert dog trots by, glancing at you with mild disinterest before curling up under a half-broken wall nearby. Even it seems to sense this place is gentle, forgotten, maybe, but not abandoned. You imagine a woe once stood where you are now, clutching a basket of too warm ice, realizing the dome had given up sometime in the night. Maybe he swore under his breath. Maybe he just sat down and ate the fruit syrup himself. Maybe he laughed. You reach into your pouch and pull out the last of the dried figs from earlier, slightly sticky now, but still sweet. You pop one into your mouth and chew slowly. Around you, the wind picks up a little, stirring the grasses. You hear the creak of something old settling further into the ground. This is what failure looks like in the desert. Slow, inevitable, and oddly beautiful. There's no great collapse, no dramatic ending. Just quiet erosion, a gentle letting go. And yet, even in failure, the dome still teaches. You see the shape of what it was. You understand what it tried to do. You respect the effort. Because the real miracle was never perfection. It was persistence. And tomorrow, someone else will rise before dawn, dig a new foundation, mix the mud, shape the bricks, and try again. Not for glory, for cool water, for chilled syrup, for the sigh that comes when heat meets its match. You lie back against the broken wall, watching the stars multiply. The dome may have melted, but the sky is still full of sharp, cold light, and that's enough. Morning again, soft and dusty. You wake on a rooftop, this time your borrowed sleeping mat curled beneath you like a thin raft on a sea of sun-warmed clay. From up here, the town reveals itself slowly. Thin trails of smoke rise from cooking fires, roosters argue. Someone clanks pots with a sleepy sort of menace. And below, in a shaded alleyway, a boy is shouting at a goat. It's an argument neither will win. But your eyes wander, past the rooftops, past the rising heat waves, to the dome you've come to recognize by now, the Yakhchal, still there, still keeping cool, still doing what it's always done. You stretch, stand, and begin your descent. Today, you're not here to observe, you've got an appointment with discomfort. Because today, you're going to learn how people survived without yakhchāls when things didn't go according to plan. When there was no ice, when everything was hot, and you had to dress for it. That's right. It's fashion time. You make your way to the cloth district, a tangle of awnings, woven shades, and billowing textiles flapping in the breeze like sleepy sails. Vendors here don't shout. They wave. They nod. Everyone's too warm to be aggressive. You're greeted by tailor, tall and draped in 7 layers of what seems, at first glance, to be a cruel misunderstanding of the concept of temperature. He's wearing wool, in the desert, on purpose. And somehow, he's not even sweating. He sees your confusion and smiles knowingly. The thing is, desert fashion isn't about looking breezy, it's about managing heat, wind, sweat, and pride. And wool. Wool is breathable, it traps air, it deflects sunlight. It soaks sweat and slowly evaporates it, cooling the body in the process. Lightweight cotton came later, but even then, it was layered. Always layered. You try on a robe, it's long, slightly stiff, and covers nearly everything. No breeze reaches your skin directly, but you do feel something like insulation, a small buffer between you and the blinding sun. You look ridiculous. The tailor adds a sash, a scarf, and then just for fun a vibrant palm fiber hat that makes you look like a wandering librarian from a desert monastery. Perfect, you thank him and continue walking through the narrow streets, noting how everyone's dressed not for fashion week, but for survival. Long sleeves, high collars, even the children wear layers. The colors are soft white, beige, pale blues, tones that reflect rather than absorb. Everything flows. The trick, it turns out, is to never let the sun touch you. If it touches you, it wins. Historians still argue whether ancient Persians intentionally developed this layered clothing approach based on scientific understanding of heat exchange, or if it simply evolved through generations of trial and very sweaty air. Either way, it worked. People in this region learned to be cool without cool air. And their wardrobes were part of that technology. You turn a corner and spot something familiar. A man sitting in the shade of a connad outflow, soaking the hem of his robe in the water, then wrapping it back over his shoulder. The water slowly evaporates, cooling him as it dries. It's the same principle behind those clay jars you saw earlier, the ones that sweat just enough to keep their contents cool. Clothing, shelter, containers, buildings, it's all the same conversation. It's all about tricking the heat into stepping aside, even for a moment. You pause at a food stall, where a woman fans herself lazily, and flips flatbreads on a curved pan. She's dressed head to toe, only her hands visible, and she's standing over fire, and yet she seems more comfortable than you. You ask her how. She points to her sleeves. 2 layers, she says, grinning, one for the fire, one for the sun. You nod respectfully and buy a flatbread. It burns your fingers and your mouth, but it's worth it. You find a shaded spot and sit, chewing thoughtfully. Around you, the town moves slowly but efficiently. No one runs. No one rushes. Every motion is calculated for minimal effort. A kind of hot weather choreography. And then it hits you. All of this, the yakhchāls, the sharbat, the caravan ice, the fashion, it's not about beating the heat. It's about living with it, respecting it, working around it. The desert isn't an enemy, it's a partner in a complicated, slightly abusive dance. A child walks by with a bundle of mint tied in a cloth. She's barefoot, her sleeves are too long. She looks perfectly comfortable. You take another bite of bread, sip warm water from your pouch, and let your layers breathe. The ice is lovely, but the people are cooler than anything packed in straw and clay. Evening again. You've swapped your robe for something lighter now, still modest, still long-sleeved, but easier to move in. There's a scent on the wine, damp stone and sugar, with just a hint of rose. It pulls you gently toward the central plaza, where lanterns bob on thin poles and shadows pool in soft, inviting shapes. Tonight, it's not a wedding, not a festival. Just a warm desert evening, which, here, is excuse enough for treats. You turn a corner and hear it, the sharp tap of metal on stone. Rhythmic and practiced, it's coming from a stall tucked beneath a woven awning where two men are at work behind a curved marble slab. One is chipping at a frozen block, while the other sprinkles powder-fine sugar into a brass bowl. There are jars everywhere, honey, grape molasses, ground pistachio, slivers of dried citrus peel. You're about to witness something sacred, dessert, cold dessert, in the desert. The man with the chisel lifts a narrow shard of ice and lays it on the slab. He begins to shave it, thin curls peeling off like wood shavings. They pile into a small bowl held by his partner, who adds a ladle of what looks like thickened pomegranate syrup, a pinch of cardamom, and a flourish of rose water. It's called faluda, and it's absurdly good. You try it, spooning up the fine, icy threads that almost melt on contact. There's a texture to it halfway between slush and glass noodles, and the flavor is sharp, fragrant, sweet in a reserved, ancient way, not sugary like modern confections. This is subtle sweetness, the kind that sneaks up on you and whispers, "You're welcome." You sit on a worn bench as the stars collect above, cradling your bowl like it's treasure. Around you, others are doing the same, leaning against walls, perched on steps, quietly enjoying something that feels like it shouldn't exist in this climate. Cold dessert, in a place where water has to be persuaded into sticking around. It's another reminder, like the sharbat, like the ice, caravans, like the canuts, that cold, here, isn't just functional. It's expressive, it's pleasure, it's ritual. You strike up a quiet conversation with the vendor, who tells you without bragging, somehow, that his family has been making faluda for 6 generations. The recipe hasn't changed much. The syrup is still brewed in the same copper pot his grandmother used. The ice now harvested from a modern freezer, he admits with a sheepish grin, used to come from the old Yakhchal near the ridge. You ask him if he misses it. He shrugs. The freezer is easier, he says, but the Yakhchal, it was quieter. He taps his forehead and adds, the ice tasted more like time. That sticks with you. Historians still debate where desserts like faluda originated. Some say Shiraz, others claim older roots in Elamite or Achaemenid cuisine. Some argue it's a relic of Central Asian influence, absorbed into Persian kitchens through centuries of migration and trade. Wherever it began, it stayed. It was cherished, it evolved. And here's a curious fringe detail for you. One old account describes a palace servant whose only job was to cool the dessert spoons before they were handed out at royal feasts. Not the food, the spoons, because the bite should start cold. That's commitment. You take another bite. It crunches softly, the rosewater blooming across your palate, and you feel the edges of your thoughts loosen. The plaza feels like a dream now, soft voices, flickering oil lamps, warm tiles, underfoot. Somewhere, a cat slinks between baskets of mint, and the sound of a flute meanders through the air like smoke. You lean back against the bench and close your eyes for just a second. This cold is different from what you felt inside the dome. It's not architectural, it's emotional. Ice as comfort, ice as joy, ice as a pause in a hot, relentless day. It makes you wonder, when the Yakhchals were first built, was this the vision? Not just survival, not just preservation, but pleasure. Could those early builders have imagined their ice being shaped, flavored, passed between hands under starlight? You hope so. Because this quiet bowl, this patient evening, this moment of sweetness stolen from the desert's jaws feels like the best answer to the question, why bother? Why dig pits, mold bricks, chase cold under stars? Because one spoonful of chilled pomegranate, taken in silence on a summer night, is enough. You let the last bit melt on your tongue, The plaza hums on, gentle and timeless, and the ice, in its small, flickering way, endures. The abbess has declared today a silent retreat, which is a very polite way of saying no speaking whatsoever and try not to look too expressive either. The intention, as always, is contemplative solitude, space for the soul to settle, the mind to still, and perhaps, if you're lucky, to hear something divine in the quiet. Pipkin is not a fan. He lasts about 6 minutes into breakfast before letting out a yawn so long and squeaky it startles Sister Joan into spilling her barley tea. You pretend nothing happened. Everyone pretends nothing happened. Sister Joan stares straight ahead like a soldier enduring battlefield conditions. Pipkin, pleased with himself, resumes napping on your lap. Today's schedule is loose. Prayer, of course, remains a constant, but without the usual murmur of coordination or discussion. You find it oddly freeing, like walking barefoot or reading with the wind as background music. There's less performance, no smiles to manage. Just silence, broken only by rustling wool, flickering flames, and the occasional unrepentant ferret sneeze. You take your embroidery to the cloister walk, where sunlight pools on the stone like warm honey. You sit against the wall, cross-legged, and unfurl your project, a series of stitched symbols meant for the altar cloth, grapes, a chalice, a few elegant swirls. But tucked in the margin, just for you, you're stitching a small creature curled into the crook of a sleeve. Its tail wraps twice, the thread color just a shade lighter than the background, barely noticeable, unless you're looking. Historians often overlook this kind of expression, the personal, the playful. But needlework in convents wasn't just a duty. It was a language, a prayer you could wear, a rebellion you could hide in silk. It said some nun-stitched hidden initials, tiny animals, or coded symbols into otherwise ordinary pieces. One surviving chasuble has a swan whose neck is bent into the shape of a letter M. No one knows why. Some think it was the sister's name, others think it was just a joke between friends. You glance at Pipkin, who is now sleeping with one paw dangling out of your sleeve like punctuation. Later, you help Sister Marjorie in the storeroom. She passes you dried herbs and gestures toward the jars with raised eyebrows: lavender, rosemary, lemon balm. You nod. The unspoken system is smooth, wordless, and surprisingly efficient. Pipkin rides tucked in the folds of your sash, occasionally sniffing the jars with the air of a very discerning apothecary. He lingers on the mint, then sneezes into a pile of fennel. Sister Marjorie bites her lip to suppress a laugh. In the afternoon, you're sent to copy psalms. The scriptorium is half-lit, the air thick with dust and devotion. You sit down, ink your pen, and begin. The silence magnifies every sound: quills scratching, pages turning, a single dropped bookweight that echoes like thunder. Somewhere across the room, a small animal chitters. You do not look up. You copy Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, and pause. You glance down at Pipkin, now curled in your lap, his nose tucked beneath his tail. Your fingers rest gently on his sigh, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. And you think perhaps this, too, is a dwelling place, not just the cloister, but this tiny, living warmth that anchors you to the moment. This strange, sacred companionship that persists even when everything is stripped away: speech, comfort, certainty. Historians still argue whether these creatures were distractions from holy life, but what if they were part of it? What if holiness can look like fur in your tea, or claw marks on a prayer scroll, or the weight of a living body reminding you to be here now? You close your eyes for a moment. The room continues around you. Tens scratch, dust floats, someone sighs. When you wake, because yes, you do drift for just a moment, the candle beside you has burned lower, and Pipkin is gone. You panic briefly. Look beneath the bench, check your sash, check your pocket, check the folds of your coat, just in case. Then you hear it, a faint, scuffling noise behind the cabinet. You rise, slowly, and there he is, half buried in a drawer of scrap vellum, chewing on what appears to be a decorative capital R. You scoop him up. He chirps once, then settles back into your arms. Mission accomplished. You return to your seat, resume copying. And beside your last verse, you add one more line, not in Latin, but in the common tongue. He is with me, in the silence, and in the small scurrying sounds beyond it. You don't sign it, you just write, and listen. Just write. Your hands unclench, your jaw softens. You don't sleep, but you almost could. And in this house, on this night, with these curtains and that clock and that ridiculous sandwich, almost as a kind of triumph, squeals as a clay pot tips and spills cold water on her toes. She laughs, her mother scolds her, half smiling. And the dessert, as always, watches. The frost has thickened overnight, everything crackles underfoot. Even the ivy on the garden wall seems to shiver. You wake with your nose cold and your sleeves pulled high, and Pipkin ever the opportunist has relocated from your shoulder to the warm crook behind your knees. He's stretched out like a string bean, and you hate to move him. But the bell tolls, and duty is never optional in a place like this. You whisper a groggy apology, scoop him up gently, and tuck him back into your sleeve. He blinks, yawns wide enough to show his tiny fangs, and resigns himself to the inconvenience of divine schedule. This morning, your assignment is in the guest hollow rarely used room reserved for visiting clergy, noble patrons, and the occasional lost pilgrim. It smells of beeswax polish and slight resentment. You sweep, dust, and restock the rushes on the floor. Pipkin rides along in your sash, watching the process like a furry quality control inspector. At some point, you pause to examine the tapestries lining the walls. They're old, some older than the cloister itself, faded depictions of saints, miracles, and in one corner, a harvest scene featuring an unusually long-tailed animal hiding in a sheaf of wheat. You squint, Pipkin squints, you both silently agree. It's him. That afternoon, you're invited, assigned to help in the archive, where Sister Hilda has unearthed several boxes of unindexed correspondence. It's a mess of parchment curls, ribbon-bound letters, and fragments of personal histories. Most are dull. Records of trades, notes about barley yields, polite inquiries about whether Brother Thomas ever returned the borrowed butter churn. But occasionally, there's something strange, personal, human. One letter catches your eye. It's from a nun in a distant convent, dated nearly 100 years before. It reads, Sister Marie sends word from St. Lean's and asks again about the creature. Is it true they let it sleep in the sleeves? She swears hers. Listens during matins. I think it bites for penance. You grin. You fold it carefully, smooth the edges, and tuck it aside. A treasure. Historians still argue whether such letters or exaggerations, inside jokes, are honest glimpses into convent life. Most monastic records are meticulously formal chronicles of dates, donations, rituals. But the personal letters, when you find them, reveals something else, something warmer. A quiet rebellion of the heart tucked between lines of Latin. Backing your cell, you start your own letter, not to anyone in particular, perhaps to a future sister who might find it one day, buried under generations of folded habits and candle wax. You write about the frost, the embroidery, the sound Pipkin makes when dreaming, the way your room smells faintly of time and old parchment. You end it simply, he is warm, I am grateful, that is all. Outside, the light fades into a sort of silvery blue. You head to the chapel for vespers, fingers still ink-stained, Pipkin poking his head out just long enough to sniff the incense before deciding it isn't worth the effort. The chants rise, fall, rise again. And somewhere in the music, you hear the shape of something you can't quite name, something soft and round and real. Something that has nothing to do with theology, and everything to do with presence. After prayers, you return to your embroidery, picking up the altar cloth you've been working on for weeks. The pattern is nearly complete, grapes, stars, a stylized chalice, but in the corner, half concealed beneath a flourish of vines, you begin a new shape. Long-bodied, small-headed, tail curled like a question mark. A ferret, not named, not labeled, just there. You stitch slowly, quietly. Pipkin snores in your lap, dreaming his inscrutable dreams. You hum a hymn beneath your breath, and in the flickering candlelight, it all feels holy. It like a metronome for your delusions. Eventually, your mind starts to unravel. Not in a frightening way, just a loosening of knots. The routine, though exhausting, has done something. You're too tired to fight, to train to rebel. You start to forget which phase you're in. You forget to be angry, you forget the hour. And as the rhythm dulls your thoughts, you feel yourself slipping slowly, softly into that gentle gray space where sleep might finally arrive. Not because you need it, not because you want it, but because you've followed the rules, and in this house, in this century, that is the closest thing to grace. Yourself slowly, the wind brushing your cheek like a reminder, cool is still possible, and that's enough for tonight. There's a certain weight in the air today, the kind that settles over the cloister like a quilt made of dust, old thoughts, and the long breath between seasons. You wake slower than usual, so does Pippin. For once, he doesn't even try to demand breakfast. He simply turns once, then burrows deeper beneath your sleeve, making a noise that sounds suspiciously like a sigh. The bell still rings, the prayers still flow, but the day feels older. Somehow, you've been assigned to clean out the attic. It's not a glamorous task, just you, a broom with more splinters than bristles, and a winding staircase so steep you question whether it qualifies as penance. Pippin rides the journey curled in the front of your habit, his tail tickling your ribs. At the top, the attic is everything you'd expect, dusty, dim, and filled with the smell of wax, cedar, and the faint echo of mice long since evicted. Old hymnals, baskets of mended veils, a cracked chalice no one had the heart to throw away. You open a chest by the window and find layers of things once important: letters, bundled in faded ribbons, broken spectacles, and at the bottom, tucked under a folded chasuble, a child's drawing in charcoal. A nun, arms wide, with something small curled inside her sleeve. There's no name, no date, just a moment. Capture. The face on the nun is smiling. The ferret's tail is exaggerated, looping like a musical clef. You show it to Pippin. He sniffs it, and interested, you fold it gently and place it on the windowsill. As you dust the shelves, your hand brushes something odd, a carved wooden statue no taller than your palm. A figure of a woman in monastic robes, with a ferret curled around her neck like a stole. You turn it over, no inscription, no explanation. Just soft, warm wood, shaped by someone who clearly knew the subject. Historians still argue whether pieces like this were devotional, whimsical, or merely personal. Art in convents was rarely signed, and even more rarely explained. Some scholars dismiss such items as folk spirituality. But here, in this attic full of silence and sunbeams, it feels like truth. You tuck the statue in your satchel, not to keep, just to borrow. Back downstairs, the sisters are gathered for mid-afternoon readings. Sister Elsbeth is reciting an excerpt from a little-known 11th century mystic, who once wrote, "The spirit speaks in silence, yes, but also in the scrape of a paw against a shutter, the sudden warmth at one side, the shared breath of beasts who do not speak but know." Pippin stretches in your lap as if on cue. You resist the urge to nudge him and whisper, "That was about you." After prayers, you join Sister Hilda in the garden. The frost has lifted for a moment, and the soil is soft enough for pruning. You kneel in the earth, hands cold but steady, Pippin curled around your waist like a misplaced belt. Hilda is quiet today. She hums as she works an old melody that feels older than both of you combined. After a while, she says softly, "Did you ever wonder what people will think when they find our things?" You blink. She gestures toward your embroidery hoop, where a stitched creature nestles in ivy leaves. "They'll think we were lonely," you say. She nods, or loved. You don't respond. You just reach down and offer Pippin a crushed violet petal. He accepts it, begrudgingly. As dusk arrives, the cloister settles into its familiar hush. Shadows lengthen across the corridors, and the sky turns the color of old parchment. You light a candle in the chapel, not for anyone in particular, just for the softness of the day. Back in your cell, you place the small statue on your table. Pippin investigates it with solemn sniffs, then curls beside it as if to bless it by proximity. You write one line in your journal, "Not all relics are dead things." And then, as the wind taps gently at the shutters and the cloister exhales another ancient sigh, you lie back on your straw mattress, pull your blanket high, and feel Pippin press close heartbeat to heartbeat. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you feel timeless. Gentlemen at midnight, walking in soft, you awaken in darkness, not to the bell, not even to Pippin, but to the sound of distant thunder. Just a low grumble on the horizon, far enough to feel safe, near enough to make the stone walls hunt ever so slightly. Pippin stirs beneath your arm, ears twitching, but doesn't rise. He knows this sound. He's decided it's not his problem. You lie still for a moment, listening, There's a strange beauty in being awake while everyone else sleeps. The cloister, usually so full of subtle nose footsteps, coughs, pages turning, feels suspended. All you hear are the soft breaths of the sisters, the slow crackle of a half-dying hearth, and the steady rise and fall of Pipkin's breath against your side. When the bell does finally toll, it echoes through the cloister like an old memory. You rise, dress, tuck Pipkin gently into your sleeve, and move toward the chapel with the rest of the sisters, some half awake, others wrapped in shawls like ghosts still waiting for their bodies to catch up. Today, you're meant to help Sister Agnes polish the candlesticks and the wooden benches. She's already begun by the time you arrive, sleeves rolled, habit streaked with wax. She looks up, nods toward Pipkin, and grunts, "Your assistant is late." Pipkin responds by immediately knocking a cloth into the candle bucket. You spend the next hour in companionable labor, the scent of Olan beeswax thick in the air. Pipkin eventually settles on a windowsill, sunning himself like royalty. Outside, the sky is shifting, storm clouds breaking into streaks of light. The kind of weather that makes the cloister courtyard shimmer, as if someone brushed the stone with a wet finger. After chores, the abbess gives a rare assignment, a dramatic reading in the chapter house. Not scripture today, but a devotional play, a passion scene written by a nun to generations ago. You've read it before. The dialogue is stilted, the moral clear as crystal, but the final act includes a character simply labeled the creature, who appears wordlessly and brings a cup to a weeping monk. Historians still argue about that one. You're given the role of narrator. Your voice is quiet but steady, and as you read, Pipkin naps in the crook of your arm, a tiny soft weight anchoring you. You feel every eye on you, not for the words, but for the silent, slow-moving creature snoring gently against your ribs. By the final scene, half the sisters are smiling, and no one is pretending it's just about the play anymore. That evening, you're asked to show the novices how to care for parchment. It's a delicate art, scraping, smoothing, avoiding moisture, and always storing with lavender to keep out insects. You demonstrate carefully, Pipkin perched on your shoulder like a furry scroll weight. One of the girls raises her hand aloud during lessons and whispers, "Did sisters really always keep animals with them?" You pause, considering. "Not always," you say, "but often enough to leave traces," and it's true. Over the years, you've learned to spot the signs, uneven nib marks on manuscript edges, faint claw prints in wax seals, marginalia with tails to long to be purely decorative. These aren't just accidents, they're echoes. And when you walk the older halls, those not used for decades, you sometimes swear you can hear tiny footsteps that don't quite match the rhythm of human ones. The ghosts of pets, perhaps, or the memory of them, stitched into the stones. Back in your cell, you gather your parchment, brush off Pipkin's stray hairs, and begin to write again, not for the abbess, not for any chronicle, just for yourself. Today the storm passed. Today he watched a play. Today, someone asked if he was real. He sneezed on a novice. I said yes. You sign it with a small doodle, a ferret curled into the letter O. You don't know if anyone will ever read it. You don't mind. As night folds over the abbey, the walls breathe again. A different silence, now heavier, softer, wrapped in wool, and the sun rises slowly today, reluctant and pale. It drips light over the cloister walls, like watered-down honey, just enough to warm the stone under your feet, but not enough to drive away the crisp morning chill. You sit beneath the fig tree, bundled in 3 layers of habit, your embroidery in hand, and Pipkin stretched across your lap like a self-satisfied scarf. He blinks at the world with the knowing calm of someone who's been fed, fussed over, and forgiven for chewing a page of Psalms just yesterday. Today is one of those rare days with no assigned duties beyond the ordinary rhythm: prayer, meal, prayer again. Which means you have space to simply exist. It's an unusual sensation in the cloister, where time is often measured in bells and bread crusts. You let your needle pause, gaze up at the sky. It's blue, not the rich, endless blue of summer, but the washed-out, sleepy hue of a sky that forgot it had somewhere to be. The wine moves through the garden, stirring rosemary and lavender into the air. Pipkin's nose twitches once. He approves. Later, you find yourself walking the cloister's outer corridor, where the walls are older, the plaster flaking in places to reveal the stones beneath. This is the part of the abbey not shown to visitors, not because it's secret, but because it's ordinary, quiet, worn, but it's your favorite. Here, the history breathes. The etchings of sisters long past are still faintly visible on the walls, scratched initials, dates, even a crude heart with 2 sets of initials inside. And lower down, just at your knee level, the tiniest paw print, perfectly preserved in the stone floor where it must have set before the mortar dried centuries ago. You press your fingers to it. It's small, likely a cat, possibly a pipkin of another era. You whisper, "I see you." Pipkin leans out of your sleeve and sniffs the wall, then sneezes on it. A traditional greeting. You assume, back in the library, you help Sister Hilda sort through the winter manuscript texts bound in leather that creaks like old bones. One of them, an anonymous devotional from the 1300s, includes a passage you'd missed before. And there was with her a beast, long and low, soft in coat and quiet in spirit, who stole not from hunger but from delight, and nestled beside her as she spoke the hours. She called him Joe, and he was, historians still argue over that line, was Joe a metaphor for the Holy Spirit? A symbolic manifestation of peace, or was it, quite literally, a ferret? You close the book. You don't need to decide. Later, you return to your embroidery. The altar cloth is nearly complete. You've finished the vines, the stars, even the chalice. Only one space remains in the corner, a blank circle you've saved for last. And there, you now stitch the smallest shape, a curled body, a gentle paw, a tail that loops like an unfinished thought. No name, no caption, just presence. You tie the final knot, snip the thread, and breathe. As evening comes, you sit once more by the chapel fire, Pipkin asleep on your shoulder, your eyes half-lidded with peace. Around you, your sisters sing the final hymn of the day, low, soft, wordless toward the end, just breath and tone. You feel your body relax, not from exhaustion but from fullness. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to be earned or explained, the kind that simply is. And as the last note fades into the stone, you whisper something no one else hears, not a prayer, not a confession, just thanks. Thanks for furry in your sleeve, for teeth marks in ribbons, for paw prints on sacred parchment, for mischief, for mercy, for the knowledge that somewhere in the folds of history, your life quiet, strange, and filled with a love no doctrine ever wrote down was here. And now, as the fire dims and the bells fall silent, you find yourself slowly releasing the weight of the day. The stones beneath you are cool, but the warmth of something small, something alive lingers at your side. Your body softens, inch by inch. Your breath lengthens, matching the rhythm of Pipkin's tiny